Wait for a little bit for people to get on. All right, we're live. Hello.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. It's Mike here at Wigert's Bonsai in Southwest Florida. We're going to be talking a little bit about Cascade Bonsai today. Do we have any viewers so far, Lindsay?
We have one, two.
All right, well welcome everybody. Thanks for tuning in. We are going to be talking about Cascade Bonsai and all of its derivatives. I'll probably repeat some of this information as some of you kind of are getting on board and tuning in with us. Cascade Bonsai is one of the 5 primary styles of bonsai. Formal upright, informal upright, slanting, semi-cascade, and cascade styles comprise our 5 most basic bonsai styles. Cascade does make up a big portion of the primary styles because it does take up 2 different styles, semi-cascade and full cascade, and there are derivatives of that as well, such as informal cascades, classical cascades, and more contemporary cascade designs. I do have a demo tree that we're going to work on today. This is a Ficus Burt Dayvii, popular ficus used in tropical bonsai. It's highly sought after for kind of the aged look to the bark and to the tree itself as it starts to get old. You'll start to see that it has what I like to call fat rolls. As it starts to age, it really does start to get those wrinkles and really convey a sense of an old, majestic tree. So this is a species that we really do like to work with, especially amongst ficus bonsai. So once we get through kind of talking about Cascade, I'll start working on this guy and start answering some questions on the demo material. I do have a couple of examples of cascades. Now, one thing being a nursery where we are constantly selling trees and cycling trees out, it was hard to find examples of good formal cascades and kind of classically designed cascades. We are also a contemporary nursery, so a lot of our newer designs on cascades tend to be a little on the avant-garde side or more stylized side. So probably not the best to a couple of trees here, a full cascade of Erics, and then a small Shohin semi-cascade here. The full cascade is a buttonwood, and this is a tiger bark ficus. So the buttonwood, if you guys can see that in the shot, is actually another derivative of cascade. It's a Bunjin cascade. So Bunjin being the secondary style, the cascade being the primary style. So our fundamental styles can often have secondary styles applied to them, such as last week we did a demo on a Pyrenees style tree, and we did a cascade with a Pyrenees crown. So that's similar to this. This is a Bunjin cascade. So it's kind of mixing the aesthetics of Bunjin bonsai as well as some of the key points of cascade bonsai. Cascade bonsai, what makes them different from semi-cascade bonsai is the length that they cascade down the pot. So what this style represents and what we're trying to convey is trees that are growing off of the side of cliffs or ocean banks, maybe on the coastline, and they're just slightly leaning out over the water. But oftentimes they're conveyed as being mountain trees growing away from the cliffside or the mountain face, getting sun.
Mike, can we pause it? Maybe you want to take off the headphones, and can you power them off? We have, Martin says that we have weak sound right now, so I'm thinking it might have something to do with those. I'll just, here, no worries. Let's see. We can't. We're not unconnected, video interrupted.
Testing. Martin, can you hear me out there?
All right.
Louder. Martin, can you hear me out there? Check one, check one.
Anyone commenting they can hear?
No, nothing. Can you guys hear us? Anybody?
Testing? Give us a shout out if you can hear us. Thumbs up for sound.
You had great sound before, Steve said. All right. Yes. All right. So Steve said we had better sound. Okay. Do you guys like the sound now or before? But better than earlier.
So Can everybody hear me and what I'm saying?
Just a little low, not loud enough. Loud and clear.
Loud.
I can hear Andrea. Hey Gail, it's Lindsay here. All right, we're gonna work on Mike's sound. All right. Well,
We're good. Same as before, a little low. Now.
Are they off now?
no, they're still on.
Am I going to use them?
I think so.
Okay.
Go for that.
Okay. Everybody hear me now? Testing, testing. Testing, testing. Better, worse? Testing.
Just go with that, I guess.
All right. Can you guys hear Mike?
Okay, well, we're going to continue our discussion on Cascade. I am going to kind of go over what I was just talking about again. So what Cascade bonsai are and what they represent are trees typically growing off of mountains or off of cliff sides. So it's a tree that is basically growing away from an obstruction or away from a shaded outcropping out to where it can get light. So oftentimes they'll grow down and out, and so we often get this, what we call a cascade style, the trees growing down and away from the pot. So that's what we're trying to represent. You can also see this physiology on trees that are growing near water, where they start to take on a one-sided lean and start to gracefully kind of go over the water. That's where we get most of our semi-cascade inspiration from. So that's kind of where we get this aesthetic from. It's not just pulled from thin air, even though sometimes it does look very, very artistic. But we are representing these very ravaged mountain trees or coastline trees. So, as I was talking earlier, this cascade represents both aesthetics of Boonjin and also full cascade. And what makes it a full cascade is the fact that the foliage dips below the foot of the pot. So here's the foot of the pot. Because the majority of the foliage is beneath that, that is a full cascade.
Mike's mom
So
said hi.
if you look at this tree here, my foliage point never crosses the threshold of the foot of the pot, and so that is a semi-cascade. So we have a semi-cascade and a full cascade. Now, some artists, to take that a little further, have also talked about the majority of the foliage and where that ends up. Because the length of the terminal branch really could change the style if you just change the pot to a longer pot. More advanced people like to actually look at the foliage mass, and if the majority of that is above the foot, then it's a semi-cascade. If below the foot, then a full cascade. So there are a little more elaborate ways of kind of determining that. So,
Hey Mike,
yes.
your mom said hi.
Hi Mom, thanks for tuning in. We had some technical difficulties, but thanks for bearing with it. So, cascade design, also, like I said earlier, I touched on the fact that there are formal cascades, informal cascades, semi-cascades, and then a mix between contemporary and classic cascade aesthetics. So, I also mentioned that in the nursery we do sell trees quite frequently, so we don't always have the best examples to show every version of the cascade at any given time. So I did draw some illustrations to kind of go over some of the differences in cascades. They are pretty rudimentary, but I hope that that'll kind of convey the point. So our first cascade would be the quintessential kind of formal cascade. And what makes that a formal cascade is that right here at the top of the arch is a full tree. So this is just like we've styled before as our bonsai. At the top of our cascade design, we form a slanting tree, always slanting from that curve, never straight up. Slanting, and we make a small tree with left, right, back, branches, and an apex. So because it has that tree at the top of that curve, it's a formal cascade, okay? To kind of compare that with an informal cascade, you'll see that this one is an informal cascade and lacks the tree at the top. So some other determining factors in these two would be that more often than not, informal cascades are used for trunks that have excessive movement or excitement. Something very dramatic where having a second tree on the top might actually lose some interest to the design, and so you're really focusing on showing that trunk and the drama that it has. So that's good for informal trees. Formal trees, as the name kind of states, are much more dignified, rely less on extreme movement and drama, and rely much more on stateliness, dignity, and power. So these formal cascades usually have a little less movement, a little less dramatic, but they make up for it with their fullness and their robustness. We also have a semi-cascade. So this is just illustrating what I talked about a second ago, where that terminal branch or that foliage sits above the foot of the pot. So if it descended below the foot of the pot, it would then be a full cascade. But seeing as though it's above, it's a semi-cascade with a formal top. Okay, so you can have both formal and informal semi-cascades as well. So last thing I just want to talk about, brief cascade aesthetics, is like an older kind of way of doing cascades. This is like the classical kind of approach. You don't really see this too often anymore, but a lot of our cascade aesthetics do stem from this old school design, rather. It was all about keeping the plant facing towards the viewer and having the curves at the top line up with the terminal branch at the bottom. So sorry, I meant the apex at the top with the terminal at the bottom. So you essentially end up with a straight continuous line from the top of the cascade to the bottom, and the viewer is looking at the tree head on, okay? So that's a very old style of designing cascades, and that's also where those tall, thin pots tend to come from, when we would use thinner, more less robust material, thinner, more elegant material. You'll put in those very thin, tall cascade pots, whereas now modern aesthetic, you see our more robust cascades go in these wider, shallower pots. So the aesthetic has changed. This is still a fine design idea if you like that, but not a lot of artists are working cascades in that fashion anymore. So going back to our other design, now more often than not, the artists are trying to show the cascade in profile and trying to really show the movement and the cascade going away to the side, with the viewer seeing it from the side. One other aspect of cascades when you're trying to style your own cascade is keep in mind that the general convention is to keep this first hook over the pot from touching the rim of the pot. Occasionally when we're styling trees like this one, you'll see that it is touching the rim of the pot, and that's considered bad taste. So when I go to repot that, I will probably try to get this hook and try to get the rim of the pot right in that hook where it's no longer touching that branch, okay? So those are a few little helpful hints with cascades. Do we have any questions out there so far?
Steve made a comment. He said 2 weeks ago, Mike said now is the time to defoliate Premna. I did that day, and it's come roaring back. Thanks, Mike.
No worries, no worries. I have noticed that a lot with the Premna is this time of year, I go through and I balance the vigor. I take off a lot of the last season's leaves that have yellowed out. I'll cut it back pretty hard, and so far all of them have responded well with new vigorous growth. I have a few that I'm even planning to repot once we get into even warmer weather. So I am on, this is the second year in a row where I've done this in this time, and I've been very happy with the results. So thank you for that. Any other questions? Okay, louder. All right. So as I was talking about our demo tree, we'll start getting into this today, or now. This is a Ficus Burt Dayvii. It is one of the most sought after ficus for tropical bonsai. My personal favorite is Ficus Tiger Bark, and then following with the Burt Dayvii's Nana and the regular Burt Dayvii. So the reason they're so sought after is because of the age that they can really convey on their trunks. If you can see in here, or those of you who have been listening already, you can see that it does take on these wrinkles, these like fat rolls as they age, and that really does kind of convey the sense of an ancient or older tree. So this the species is well known for that, getting this kind of gnarly growth, gnarly branch collars, things like that. So makes it very desirable for conveying old trees. Now with Cascade bonsai, we do always want to play angles. So when we first look at this tree, don't always just stop at what the stated angle is or at the front that you were given. That might not be the best use of the material. So this one, when I found it in the nursery, or when me and Eric were looking at it, it's kind of, I had first looked at it with this as the front. And I'm not sure if that's how it was originally conveyed. But this does have a nice powerful trunk. It does show a fair amount of age. And so that was instinctually my first choice for the front. But Cascade bonsai excel in playing with angles. And so a lot of the best Cascades started out as upright trees, or trees that were never intended to be Cascades, and it took a creative artist to see something that no one else did and flip and alter that tree to be something else. So while I was looking through this tree, I noticed that by choosing this as the front, I was doing the tree a great disservice, and two of the biggest, oldest branches would end up going to the back of the design and wouldn't be visible to the viewer. So our two key branches, the oldest parts of the tree, would be lost on the design. So that's not very efficient or respectful use of such old material. So I decided to continue looking and exploring possibilities for a front. So when I say exploring possibilities, that means always tilting the tree. Tilt and see if that opens things up and makes things a little clearer. You can tilt it up as well, and that did benefit me to some degree. Okay. Then I started turning it this way. All right. And now we're starting to see things a little differently. There are some pros and cons to choosing this as the front. I wasn't too happy with this kind of third trunk growing out towards the viewer, but then by tilting this like that, I noticed that all of my large branches then came into view and could now be used in the design, and all I have to do is overlook this obstruction to the front, which we can try to tastefully deal with and make it an advantage to the front rather than something that's detracting. So I think that's going to end up being the front. I think I decided on this is going to be the path that I'm going to take this tree, and that way we'll get to save the oldest parts of the tree and pay the tree the biggest respect. Okay, I'm not a big advocate of taking very old trees and cutting them back and regrowing them with young branches. I think that once a tree attains a certain amount of age, you do need to work with and respect that age and make it the best tree you can with what is already there. So with this tree, that's exactly what I'm going to do. So the first thing I'm going to do is set it up so that I can work on it safely and at the cascading angle that I want, and not have to worry about it sliding around or having to constantly move it and look at the angle. So I'm just going to set it now. This is a table that was made by one of our students, Bruce Riggins. He makes our wire caddies as well. So this is a little tilt table he made. I'm just going to come to the front to really see.
Okay, we have a couple questions.
Sure.
Steve would like to know, what is this tree's name? I think it's the species is what he's referring to?
I refer to him as Howard. No, but seriously, he's a Ficus Burt Dayvii. As of yet unnamed, but it is a Ficus Burt Dayvii, and that is the species. If I could just find a good place to attach this one.
And Adrian had a question. He was curious as to what makes ants want to go in your bonsai soil.
Well, just like anything else, ants are looking for a place to build their home, and a bonsai soil provides a great place to build little tunnels. It's moist, there's plenty of food available, and especially if you have pests on top of your tree. So one of the primary reasons you get ants to begin with is that they actually start farming aphids and scales and other insects on your plant, and they decide that it's a very convenient place to set up shop. So ants, as crazy as it sounds, are capable and do use and promote agriculture. So it sounds crazy, but ants do farm and protect the aphids and honeydew secreting insects that are on your plant. So if you start seeing ants on your plants, it's a good idea to start checking for other pests too, because they're usually there for a reason. So, and if they do find a nice place where they can feed and protect those aphids, then they will set up shop in your soil and you'll then have to worry about the ants and get rid of the ants. So now we're pretty stable. I don't think it's going to fall off. I might have to move some of these bungee wires as I'm working, and I might also have to rotate the tree and walk around to also work on the tree adequately. You know what I'm missing is that wire caddy.
Oh,
I thought I brought
it's
it up.
I grab it. I'll
Oh,
see
it's
it.
right there.
Yep.
Never mind. Okay. All right. So the first thing I'm probably going to do is just clean up this trunk. There's a lot of these roots kind of growing out of the pot, escaping the pot and crossing the trunk. I just want to get rid of a lot of those. I just did a video on tiger bark ficus this morning, and in that video I was talking a lot about the pros and cons of aerial roots on design. The pros are that if you want to convey the look of a banyan tree in a bonsai, then you have to have the aerial roots. It is a kind of key feature to banyan style trees. So if you want to show a banyan, a true banyan, then you will live with the aerial roots, and you will also have to deal with the reverse taper that comes from those aerial roots. So a lot of contemporary artists or artists that are practicing bonsai to like the Japanese level or the Taiwanese level have kind of gotten away from using aerial roots in design, and the reason being is wherever the aerial root attaches itself to, you will eventually get reverse taper. The tree will start, or the branch rather, will start pulling more nutrients from the aerial root than it does the trunk, and you'll start to get like a Popeye arm.
Hey, we got a question from Rick. He wants to know, why aren't you defoliating?
I probably will. I just want to get the trunk kind of cleaned up so far. But I'm also probably going to cut this back pretty good, so I didn't think it was going to be as big of a project to defoliate. So I am going to take some leaves off once I get to the actual structure though. So good question. Cascade style bonsai are probably my favorite. I really do enjoy making them and working with them. For those of us who are using smaller material or like cuttings or $25 pre-bonsai, the best way to kind of start to form a cascade from raw stock is to find the lowest branch on the tree and start to wire that out and down, you know, basically cascading that over the side of the pot that it's growing in. There are also styles of trees where they might not be cascades or semi-cascades, but may have a cascading branch. So taking a small feature from cascade style and having one or two branches that cascade.
All right, we've got a question from Jeff in Eddington, North Carolina.
Hey Jeff!
He was wanting a good way to encourage the formation of aerial roots in my tiger barks, like the one you just spoke about.
So one of the key feature of aerial roots is humidity. So the other thing is being pot bound. So those two things, high humidity and being pot bound, will increase the amount of aerial roots that your tree will give off. So these trees start life as epiphytes first, kind of like an orchid or a bromeliad. Basically a bird eats the fig, flies around, deposits the fig into a palm tree or another tree that provides an adequate host, and the ficus starts to germinate. Well, for the first year or two of its life, the roots are not in contact with any soil. So all moisture that it absorbs is through the air. And so the same thing sort of happens with root-bound ficus. When they reach that point where they can no longer find soil to put roots into, they will start bursting with aerial roots to try and combat that, almost reverting back to their epiphytic form. So that's one way, is to just let them get pot bound. The other way is to wrap certain areas of the trunk, maybe scour it or scrape it, and then wrap it with sphagnum moss. And sphagnum moss increases the humidity near the trunk and will also start to respond by pushing aerial roots. Kind of like doing an air layer without actually taking the tree off the trunk. So that's another way of doing it. Down here in Florida, it happens naturally on its own. Every summer when we hit high humidity, they tend to start doing a lot of aerial root formation. So we don't really have to do any of the special techniques to do it. But sphagnum moss, high humidity, and letting it get pot bound will all help you develop those aerial roots.
All right, Christopher from Pinellas Park, Florida says when you put a tree on that steep angle, it makes it difficult when you repot it because half of the roots are up in the back. How do you repot and keep those roots in a shallow pot?
So with, that is a great question. With this tree, I'm not worried about it. Like this is a tree that I can cut many roots, even plate the roots back or cut them back to a stub. And as long as I cover them with some soil or sphagnum moss, they'll root out just fine, and I don't have to worry about that. However, this is a technique that's used on much more fussy trees like junipers, buttonwoods, things like that, and you do have roots that are sticking up afterwards. And so commonly what they'll do in Japan, or well, even here now, in high-level bonsai, is when you have those roots sticking out of the soil, you cover them with muck, which is basically sphagnum and organic soil and water, or just straight sphagnum, and you cover them completely for a while, maybe a year or two, and yes, you will have that unsightly roots sticking up from the pot, but as you get more and more roots into the actual pot, you are less reliant on the ones sticking out, and on the next potting or the potting after that, you'll be able to take care of that issue and either work it down, carve it down, or find another way to mediate that. So that's not going to be an issue long term on the tree.
All right. Adrian would like to know the best way to grow cuttings.
So every tree has a different kind of want and likes and dislikes when rooting cuttings. So I have good success with some species and not great success with others. My primary means of like rooting Premna and sea hibiscus and easy cuttings, so things that are easy, Ficus, Bougainvillea, are basically I would, take a bigger one than that. I take a woody cutting, but then I take every leaf off of it, every single leaf, okay? And I'll fill this, I'll put this with as many other cuttings as I can make, so hopefully 20 of these, and I'll put them in the smallest pot that I could fit them in. So if I have 20 cuttings, I'll probably put them all in a little 4-inch, and then I'll water them and put them in the shade, and then only water them as they dry out. And for a lot of our tropical species, that's all you have to do to make a cutting. So you do want to not put them in too big of a pot. So if you have one cutting you're trying to root, it needs to go in the smallest pot that it can fit in, so that it doesn't stay too wet.
Carlos would like to know, do you use rooting hormones when repotting in all species?
No, I don't use it when repotting. I have never used it for that. I do use it for cuttings, like if I have a fussy cutting or I'm trying to root something that's not as easy as a ficus or a hibiscus, so I will use rooting hormone for that. But I don't use it for repotting, typically. Not saying you can't use it, I just have no experience with it.
Nikki says, hi Mike,
Hi, Nick.
when styling aerial roots, do you adhere to the same basic rules as styling / removing branches?
Kinda. Like, there is kind of a thought process behind aerial roots. Most artists will say that roots growing off of branches are the best. So your best aerial roots would be ones like this here that are actually growing off of a branch. The least desirable ones are the ones that grow off of the trunk at an angle towards the soil, that take on almost like a buttress. Those are the least desirable aerial roots because they don't ever grow straight. So when trying to convey a banyan style, think of the physiology of a banyan. The branches come down on our ficus, they drop aerial roots, and over time those aerial roots become trunks. Then that's what conveys the banyan style, is each one of those aerial roots dropping straight down, straightening out and becoming a trunk, which then widens the whole profile. So, so that's what I know about the aerial roots. So I would basically, any crossing aerial roots you want to eliminate, I eliminate any that aren't growing off the branches, any that are maybe strangling or girdling the trunk, stuff like that. I just want to keep it as neat and as orderly as I can. Any other questions out there?
I think you're on top of it right now.
All right. Hope everybody's staying safe out there and hopefully not losing your minds with boredom. It's been tough not being able to see our families and friends. At least we have bonsai. Okay, so I'm just slowly cutting these roots off. The ones that have no future with us, they're basically just growing and tangling up the design, wrapping around other branches. So they're not going to be aesthetically pleasing, not going to work with our design in any way. So I'm just removing those and cleaning up our design. There are other trees that can be used for banyan style other than ficus trees. Clusia drop aerial roots readily. That's commonly used for banyan style in places like Hawaii. Schefflera arbicola is commonly used for banyan style. They also drop aerial roots. So it doesn't just have to be a ficus to be a banyan style. So now I am going to rotate the tree so that I can look at it, so I can just make some adjustments here. Maybe sit down so I can talk to you guys a little bit.
Steve says, these Tuesdays with Mike have been great.
Well, these Tuesdays with Steve have been great. Thanks, Steve. So, yeah, it helps me get out of the house and talk to you guys and get to do some bonsai.
Can I move the camera over there?
Yeah, sure.
While you're working.
So I haven't even gotten to the fun part yet. I'm just cleaning up trunks right now. And just a reminder, you guys don't have to just ask ficus questions. They can be on any tropical bonsai. We can also just talk about movies if you guys want.
You tell them about Thursday? 3
Oh,
sessions.
yeah, so we will be, on Thursday, we tried this out last week where I was doing online classes. At least online advice and trying to give some help and some guidance on
Over
people's
Zoom and
collections. So we'll be resuming that this Thursday as well. Cost is $25 per person for a half hour. And you would just contact the nursery and talk to Andrea to sign up for that. I do think it is selling pretty quickly, so try and reserve a spot as soon as you can. There's 3 spots left currently. And once those are sold out, they'll be sold out. We will also be having another one the following Saturday, I think. So if you miss your chance to get in on this one, just still contact us and we'll try and get you in for the following Saturday.
Rick Jeffrey would like to know what day is the fishing video.
Ooh, Rick! That, you know what? I haven't set that up yet, but I guess the day I start catching fish again.
He says snook.
Snook, yeah. No, I'm trying. I'd like to make that video. Yeah, I do, for those who follow me on social media, or those who don't, I do like to fish as well. So when I'm not bonsaiing, I'm either hanging with my significant other or trying to fish.
Could you remind the people of what type of tree this is?
Yes, so this is a Ficus Burt Dayvii. It's a unique species of ficus, one that's very sought after for tropical bonsai. Just gets a very, very old, rugged bark relatively early on in the tree's life and just conveys the feeling and essence of an old tree, again, at a much younger life than some other trees would. So it has a lot of great characteristics for tropical bonsai, and it's also a rarer kind of species to come across. So especially one this size, this was probably one of the bigger ones I've seen. So.
And we have a couple questions.
Okay.
The Brazilian rain tree from last week did sell. Sorry, Nick.
Yeah, sorry, Nick. I didn't know.
Didn't last long. Clara from Brownsville, Texas. Are you going to have a Tuesday with Mike on how to bonsai a succulent?
Well, we can definitely do that, sure. We use a lot of succulents here in Florida, so we can, what we've been trying to do to gauge interest and keep it fair is after these classes we've been taking a poll and seeing what people want to see next. So I can't promise you that our next video will be on succulents, but what I can promise you is we'll put succulents on the poll and we'll see if we can get some more interest in that, and maybe that'll win out, and I'd be happy to do one for you guys. But we do want to just make sure that we're catering to as many people as we can. So we'll put it on the poll and see how it does up there, and hopefully next week we'll be doing a jade or another succulent.
All right, Gary has a question. Do you eventually use cut paste on any of the cuts, or is that not necessary?
No, cut paste is very necessary. I do use cut paste on all cuts over 1/4 inch. So far I haven't made any big cuts. I'm just kind of cleaning out old roots. Nothing that's bigger than 1/4 inch, so I haven't really needed to use it yet. But any large cuts, definitely I want to paste. Not that you can't get away with not pasting it, it's just the rate of healing that you'll get if you paste. It will heal incredibly fast, much faster than without it.
Jane asks, when you prune a Brazilian rain tree, how do you get the canopy so perfect? What tool or method do you use?
No special tool or method. So it's time and good technique. So we basically wire structure first. We'll style the tree, get a good structure, and we may wire branches that we need to build out the actual structure of the tree. And then we switch to kind of a pruning regimen where we're carefully pruning to keep it tight into the silhouette. So if you look at Eric's rain trees, he never lets them really run out too far before pruning them. So he's always keeping them very tight, and they fill in all the time. So they're always getting denser and denser and denser. The other thing is, here in Florida, we grow our rain trees in full sun. So there's no lanai, there's no screening, nothing that's going to shade them at all. So they do get the full energy that they can from the sun. They're getting as much light as they can, and that seems to help them stay denser and happier. So I've noticed some of my students grow them in the shade, and they don't ever quite look as full or as, I don't want to keep saying robust, I've said that like 6 times in this video, but robust. They look very good. So that's what I know, is there's no super special trick. We don't feed them with anything special other than our fertilizer that we feed everything else with. It's just staying on top of our maintenance and having a good plan and just making sure that we don't let them grow out of shape. So.
All right, Justin has a question about ficus. He wants to know, do all ficus secrete the white sticky sap when you cut the branches?
Yes, every ficus does. They all sort of have a latex-based sap in them. Even the trees that they get latex from are ficus, I believe. Could be wrong.
I did not know that.
But rubber trees and things like that are commonly used to get latex out of them.
And can we repeat the name of the tree one more time?
Ficus Burt Dayvii. So I think there is a spelling, if you want to.
Someone did leave the name in the comments, but I guess if you guys are interested in the spelling right there. Maria would love to see you work on a jade.
Okay, well, we can definitely put that in the poll.
Charles says, when you plant a tree, what is the feature of the tree that is the most important for future of the design? Trunk line, root buttress, branch placement, or some other feature?
That is a great question. So one thing I can tell you is in bonsai there are no blanket answers. There's not going to be a formula that I can give you that will always work for every tree. Some trees are going to be all about the nabari. Some trees are not. A good example of that is junipers are not growing for nabari. Nobody really cares if your juniper has a great nabari, because 9 out of 10 times it's going to be half dead and half of your nabari is just going to be deadwood. So that's not a tree that we really are focusing on the nabari very much. We do still focus on trunk line and branches and deadwood, so that's the primary concern of that. Whereas trees like maples, the primary focus would be first on the nabari. The nabari comes first and foremost, and deadwood is frowned upon. No deadwood on Japanese maples. Ramification, super, super dense ramification is important. So all of these things are important, but to varying degrees on different trees. I don't think a perfect taper ratio is perfect on a bunjin tree. You know, you can have a much smaller taper ratio on a bunjin versus more standard styles of trees. So I would say that if you have a tree that doesn't have a great nabari, work the branches the best you can, work the trunk line the best you can, and if you can use any type of technique to better the nabari, then do that. But otherwise, you really are just limited to work the tree to the best of your abilities and make the best tree that you can. So you should always be focusing on the best nabari you could do for that tree, the best branching you could do for that tree. So I do try to focus on all of that. With that thought, one more closing point to that is that the Japanese way of doing bonsai isn't about just one element of beauty. It's about these small elements, these small little details that seem almost mundane to take care of all the time, but these details all add together to make one beautiful whole. So nothing is really overlooked. Everything kind of gets its day. You know, nabari, trunk line, branching, deadwood, all of it. Okay, so I hope that helps.
All right, Kathy has a question. She has a ficus that has a few ridiculously large roots at the base. What is the best way to deal with those? Can they be split or cut them off completely or ...
So now, without seeing the tree in front of me, I can't give you the perfect advice. I can't say, all right, this is definitely what you want to do. What I can tell you is that those big roots on ficus can easily be either split, cut, you can graft into them like little rootlets. But one of the ways that I do it, one of the easiest ways, is to cut the roots and make sure that you bury them again. So things like Nerifolia and Ficus retusa, I will cut those big roots, even like that. I'll cut them and then make sure I bury that nabari low. And then on the subsequent years, I'll notice that that cut nabari has given out all these little roots and has started to divide, just like a branch. When we prune a branch, we get smaller and more sub-branching. The same thing happens with our roots when we prune those.
Rick says, when I repot, I always place them in my ICU under a maple in my yard where they will stay until they start popping. Is this a good policy? Are there some tropical species which should go right in back out full sun?
Yes, that's a great question. So for the most part, what you're doing is perfect. That's ideally what you want to do. After cutting the roots on a tree or repotting a tree, you want to slow or stop the transpiration. You don't want sun to be hitting these leaves and causing any kind of transpiration from the plant. Even if it's defoliated, you don't want excess stress on the plant with it trying to keep up with the sun and also push roots and recover from any of the work we did. So for the most part, 9 out of 10 trees will be put into the shaded location until they start to pop and grow, and then you move them back out into the sun. There are a few trees, however, which we will put into full sun right away, such as bougainvillea, jades, succulents, such as shaving brush, opercularia, what are some other ones? Acacias, and I'm not sure, can't think of any others right off the top of my head, but those ones all typically do go in full sun after repotting, and you could probably recover them just fine in the shade, but especially with like bogies and things like that, Eric has stated that you just don't have to. You can be moving quicker with them because they're so aggressive. So those trees can probably go out in the sun and you'll be just fine.
Nikki has a request. Although not a demo tree, could you maybe create a lecture video on the differences in the qualities of pots and how to choose the best pot for your tree?
Yes, I can try to do that. So Nick, what we've been doing, I just said this to one of our other people who are watching.
All right, people really want to see what you're doing.
Oh, sorry.
No, here.
I'm just defoliating.
Here.
So what we'll do is we've been taking a poll. We've been taking people's ideas during the demo, and then at the the end on Facebook, we're running polls to see what people want to see. And so I can't promise you that we'll do that as a video, but what I will do is have it added to the poll, and then we'll see if that one gets enough views or people have enough interest in it, then we'll go ahead and run a program on that. But yeah, I think that would be good, talking about the differences in pots and...
And you're defoliating with your fingers?
I am. So there's a lot of different, how do I word this? At certain parts of the tree's life, you want to be more careful than at others. So at this stage in the game, I'm working with a rough tree. It's not incredibly refined. I don't have a ton of very fine branching. It's all pretty coarse. And so I'm not really worried about breaking off a few branches as I go. I'm defoliating more for speed and convenience. And so I'm not worried about if I lose a few buds here and there. So yes, pulling with my hands aggressively like this, I'm fine with that. Now, a tree that is refined, that like Eric's buttonwood, I would not be going through Eric's buttonwood with that amount of fine branching and just ripping the leaves off by hand. I would probably take the time to get my scissors out and make sure that I assess each bud and I'm not weakening weak buds, you know, take a little more time to go through that than I would something that I'm just rough styling.
All right, so Luke says, I just got a ficus 2 days ago and repotted it yesterday. I trimmed some roots but didn't go crazy. It was nursery stock. Should I trim, defoliate, hard prune, etc., or should I let it recover for a while? I'm in the Keys.
Let it recover first. So if you ever make a mistake on your plant, such as, let's say, hypothetically, you repot it and you're not happy with the angle, do not fix it right away. Unless it's within the 10 minutes you just potted it. If it's been 24 hours or anything like that, you run the risk of doing more harm by messing with it some more. So what I would do is allow the tree to recover to the point where it's regained most of its vigor, and then you can fix those problems again, either doing a second repot or working on the branches, cutting it back. But I wouldn't repot it, wait a few days or a week, and then realize I didn't get some work done and then go and attack it again. I'd give it a little bit of a break first. But going forward, just know that you can be really aggressive with your tree. So don't be afraid with your ficus, especially being in the Keys, to cut the roots back as long as you're balancing the foliage as well. Ficus are some of the most robust trees that we could work with in bonsai, and so they be very, very forgiving for the more aggressive approaches. Okay.
Kathy has a question. Uh-oh.
Yeah.
What is the best way to deal with an area on the nabari of a ficus where there are really no roots? Would scoring slightly... I lost the rest of the question.
You could try to score it slightly to get it to push out roots, but the best way primarily is grafting. So grafting roots onto the tree. Now that sounds like it's very, very scary and very, very hard, but it's really just taking a seedling, like a small ficus, $5 ficus from here, and when you're going to repot your tree, scraping and attaching that seedling at the root base and allowing it to grow and fuse to the tree. Once that little seedling fuses to the tree, you cut off the top and the roots stay behind and are now added to your nabari for further development. So most of the guys in like Taiwan, in Japan, if they have a root issue like you're describing, they would just graft to fix it. You could try other more benign means of doing that, like scraping and trying to encourage roots to come out, almost like layering, and that can have some degree of success, but it's not guaranteed. You could have several times where you try to scrape it and get roots, only to create more and more scars that aren't giving you roots, and it could just be a frustrating process where you have to try it more than one time to get what you want. So grafting, first and foremost for me, would be my first attempt to trying to fix that. Otherwise, I'd be going to do like a layer, try to maybe do like an air layer just slightly above the ugly roots and get some new roots that maybe are in a better position. But scoring and just scoring and putting sphagnum moss or something would probably be my last resort. You know, the thing that I would do if I didn't really want to get too invested.
She's got another part to that question. She wanted to know, can you balance the size of the roots by fertilizing more heavily where the roots are smaller and weaker?
Not really, no, because the plant, it's a vascular system. So if it takes in the nutrients here, it's still going to put it throughout the whole tree. It's not going to just leave it on that one side of the tree. Now what you can do is when you repot, you'll notice that on your tree there are some roots that are this big and some that are really, really skinny, and there's varying degree of sizes. On true like Japanese bonsai or some of these trees that are growing to perfection, all of those roots are, every time they're repotted, the fat ones are cut and the skinny ones are not cut. And so they're allowed to kind of catch up to the fat ones, and so you'll start to balance out the size of the roots. Basically, each time you prune the fat ones, it slows it down, and when you don't prune the skinny ones, it speeds them up. So you're kind of balancing in that regards. As one gets too thick, you cut it, and then you leave the other ones to catch up. So I hope that makes sense. So this is also not a, this wouldn't be considered a great Cascade to kind of illustrate the concepts of Cascade. This is more of an avant-garde style of Cascade. There are a lot of issues that would make it difficult to see for a beginner, not least of which being this large growth to the front of the tree. That might make some of the rules of Cascade hard to work around. So by the book, by the rules, this tree has a lot of problems that you would read you don't want on your Cascade. Now, as we push forward into bonsai, oftentimes, like I said earlier, we pay more respect to old trees and we work with what they have. However they've been grown, if they have big flaws, we work with it instead of cut it off.
Kathy says thank you. These are great sessions. It's hard to get good tropical information up north.
Oh, well, thank you, Kathy. I appreciate you tuning in and asking questions. We're here to help.
All right. Ray says, hi, Mike. I tried to create a cascade with my ficus last year, and I liked the shape, but noticed that some roots started to show at the top this year. Not sure if it grew quite a lot, but I'm concerned with the sun hitting these roots. Would you repot it to a larger pot or trim the roots down and keep them in the same pot?
So now that's a great question, and now the answer is going to be kind of a cop-out because you can actually do either or. If you like the composition you have and you're happy with the pot it's in and you don't want to change it, then you would just prune the roots and put it right back in the pot that you like. If you have other plans, like let's say you're not happy with the tree, you're not happy with the pot, you want thicker branches, or you want to continue to grow the tree bigger, then you might put it into a bigger pot. And that will alleviate some of your pot-bound concerns while allowing the tree to continue to grow. So root pruning and keeping it in that same pot will basically maintain the design you have. So if you're happy with your tree there, just prune the roots, get it right back in that same pot, and enjoy it for another year or two. But if you do have other plans where you want to continue to progress the tree, it's not a bad idea to keep bumping it up until you're happy with it, and then let that be the final pot size, okay, if that makes sense. Be out of your guys' face in a minute. I know I'm working right in your way, but I just want to be able to see what I'm doing. So I'm removing this large branch here, basically because it's coming back in on itself. But there's a lot of straight sections without any taper that just aren't looking very good for the plant. That's better.
All right, so we have a question. In Cascade, the tip often gets thinner, losing vigor. How do you balance the vigor in a Cascade?
Okay, great question. Okay, so balancing vigor on any tree is what bonsai is all about. So high-end bonsai is all about balancing vigor. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. The easiest way to do that, and what you should be doing periodically on refined trees like that, is you need to be going through and doing partial defoliations. So one way to increase vigor down here is that maybe 2 times a year I defoliate here, or partially defoliate. Maybe I don't even defoliate. Maybe I just half cut the leaves at the top and don't half cut down here. And that will balance the vigor a little bit. So by half cutting these leaves at the top, I'm having the surface area that this has to absorb light and to photosynthesize. If I leave these intact, then now they have a heads up on the foliage up here, and the tree will start to send more and more energy to where it's using that energy most efficiently. So down here where we haven't cut the leaves, the plant's going to get those hormones and say, oh, wait a minute, that area's producing fine, I should send more and more vigor to that very efficient channel, and you'll start to get more vigor pushed to the lower branch. But you're always going to be moving the vigor back and forth, because you'll notice that the tree doesn't stay balanced forever. There will be a branch that starts to elongate faster than the others, and now vigor will start to pour into that branch as well. So Japanese bonsai, or high-end bonsai, especially with refined trees, is all about balancing vigor. Okay, and that is mostly done by leaf pruning or pruning. Okay. Good questions, though. I'm really happy with everybody's questions today. You guys are really keeping me on my toes.
Addie says, hi Mike, I made a Cascade with a Fukin tea 2 years back. However, there is no growth on the Cascade part, but a huge new shoots coming up near the root. What should be done? Your advice is solicited.
No worries. The first thing I would do is I would make sure that the cascading portion is still alive. So the way I do that is I'll usually take my scissors and I'll just gently kind of scrape the bark. And if it's green underneath, then it's still alive, and we still have a chance to get that tree to bud back and be alive on the design. We'll still be able to use that in the design. It's very important that you determine whether that's alive, because if that's alive, then you don't need the new shoot growing from the base. If it's not alive, then your new shoot growing from the base is now going to be your new cascading branch, and you'll need to keep that and wire that to go over the side. So again, I'm giving advice based on a tree that I can't really see. So, you know, if you do want to follow up and maybe send a picture or something to my email, you can get my email after this. But with what you're telling me, if I'm picturing it correctly, you've got a cascade where the cascading branch hasn't pushed any growth, but it's pushing right at the base. Sounds like that cascading portion has maybe died back, and now you have a new shoot replacing it. And so if you do, then we would need to wire that new shoot down and get rid of the old one, okay? If the old one's alive, then we might flip that and take the new shoot away and hopefully encourage the old one to bud out, okay? So another thing I'm doing on this tree that I have to be careful when I'm giving a demo is you don't want to necessarily leave branches long just for the sake of showing a cool design or a cool demo. There's many of these branches that I've cut back because they were just too long and too straight. Even if they may have done good for the demo, I want to kind of show truer work. So some of these guys that might increase our branch amount but are growing from incorrect places, I'm just going to remove those.
We do have another question. So, I don't know how to pronounce this tree. Is it a punica? Punica? P-U-N-I.
A punica. Yeah, I'm not sure what that is. I'm not sure of the punica, which one that is.
All right.
See if he has a common name or something. And yeah, if you have a common name on the punica, send it over to us.
Pomegranate.
Oh, right. Duh. Yeah. Punica granatum.
There we go.
So they can, through winter, punica. They can through winter if they're overwatered or stressed. For numerous reasons, they can start to die back. I'm not sure when yours did die back, if it did it through the winter or not. They can also die back if they're wired too aggressively, like if the branch took too many breaks and wasn't pasted or wasn't vigorous enough to kind of heal from that. But they're not technically known to die back without cause. So there's an underlying reason, a horticultural reason, something that upset the tree after either repotting or styling that caused that branch to die back. So if that is the case and the cascading portion is dead, just start to rebuild your design with the new one that's coming up, and just try to wire it a little more careful and a little more gingerly this time, and just see if that doesn't help. But pomegranates can be a touchy tree, but I wouldn't say that they're just known for dying back. They're just known to not take abuse as aggressive as some other trees.
So Nikki says, continuing off my last question, is there a particular books you would recommend that teach the finer points of pot designs, quality, and styling choices?
No, there's not a book that I know of. There is a gentleman named on Facebook, which I know a lot of people don't like to use Facebook, but it is a great learning tool. And unfortunately, some of these guys who are really pushing the art forward haven't published a book yet or have no other way of getting their information out. There's a gentleman, Michael Ryan Bell, who has been the kind of forefront American to kind of categorize and catalog all of the Japanese pots that are coming in, and he has a lot of blogs on the aesthetics and history of these pots and potters. It is limited, I think, mostly to just Japanese potters, but it does kind of convey where a lot of those old aesthetics come from, where a lot of those famous potters, their history, their kiln lineage, things like that. And I think his website is bonsaipottery.net. And it is a great reference site to just, if you have a pot with a chop on it, you're not sure who the chop is by, you can look up the chop on the website. So it is a useful tool, and he's taken a lot of time to translate a lot of that information from Japanese to English. So primarily would be the place I would start for Japanese potters. Other than that, always subscribe to contemporary reading material. Something that I read a lot of is Bonsai Focus and Bonsai International, BCI. And both of those, BCI usually has a whole article every issue on a specific potter from around the world and what their work is and how it's affecting the bonsai community. So, just trying to find new and contemporary literature on bonsai also helps contain some of that info on pottery as well. So those two websites, the Michael Ryan Bell website, and then following up with BCI, getting that magazine, or Bonsai Focus, and that'll kind of give you a little bit more info on that aspect of bonsai. Any other questions so far? We doing good?
You are doing good. So I'm gonna. What size wire are you using?
I believe it's 2.5, I think. Let's see how I want to do this.
Rashmi says, with the aerial roots, would a shiflera make a good root on rock style instead of a banyan style? And how quickly reduce the leaf size?
On Schefflera?
Yes.
Schefflera would be fine, root over rock. They would do very, very well. Not all Schefflera are created equal, and some have way better leaf qualities. I believe there's one. There was a smaller cultivar than the Arboricola, but I don't remember its name, whether it was Natasha. Look for basically the smallest cultivar you can if you're really going to do Schefflera. Arboricola is a great cultivar for it, but you can even get smaller, and that will just mean that you'll be much happier with the density and the ramification of your tree as it matures. So Arboricola does great, but there are even better. So if you can find one of the dwarfs, that's the one I would use.
Hey Ashley, go ahead and ask your question again. We might have missed it.
Is that Ashley from here?
Ashley Nicole, maybe?
Martin? Ashley Martin?
It just says Ashley Nicole. Okay, we have a couple requests for root over rock demo.
Okay.
Adrian says, when is incorrect or correct when doing lots or bends and waves and circles on branches when wiring? Are there species that you're not supposed to do spirals on the branches?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So if you want to do bonsai as strictly as like Japanese bonsai, then there are clear-cut rules. There are do's and there are don'ts. Now, with that said, once people kind of cross into that artist stage of their life in bonsai, you'll notice that the rules don't seem to mean nearly as much as they used to. A lot of the guys that I've talked to who are apprenticing in Japan or who have studied in Japan have literally said this: if it works, they do it. So there will be trees that you'll see in Japan that have bar branches and reverse taper and all the flaws that you've learned you're never supposed to have on a tree, and they'll be displayed to the highest level, and you'll wonder why. And the answer is that it works on that tree. And so bonsai, as you get better and better with it, it becomes more and more deft. You're less relying on these formulas and these rules, and you're more relying on your eye and your instinct. So to answer your question, there are some species of trees that in Japanese context, they would probably not wire them and spin them into different shapes. I don't think you'd see a ton of Ficus retusas in Japan wired and twisted into loop-de-loos. But that doesn't mean that in areas like Taiwan and areas like China that they don't do that. They do that with all sorts of materials. So it's a tricky place to get into when you start asking about definitive right and wrong, because there's always going to be a guy who goes against the grain. There's always going to be a guy that does things different. And if I can give you anything about the rules, I'll tell you that for the first 5 years that you're doing bonsai, follow the rules. Follow them, because if I don't give you a basis to build your tools, and I just say you can do anything you want, then you'll never learn. So I'd say all these rules about cascades, make sure you see that arc over the pot. Most artists in the higher end of bonsai aren't even looking at where that loop is on the pot. It's like an instinctual thing. They're not looking for that cliche cookie cutter cascade anymore. They've gone past that. So the cookie cutter designs help us learn, but don't get so hung up on when to do what. Just do what feels good to you and what you think is building you good trees. And there will be some who appreciate it, and there will always be some who don't. And that's the best advice I can give you. If you do want to stick as close to the rules, then do what the Japanese do. Don't stray from any of their techniques. Don't take ficus and do what ficus don't naturally do. So other than that, just have a good time and find your aesthetic.
All right, Victor says, hi Mike, I purchased a new bald cypress from Wigert. It is growing very, very vigorously. I'm afraid to start to trim it as the branches are very tender. Should I wait until the branches turn to hardwood?
No, you don't have to wait until they turn to hardwood. I wouldn't go absolutely gangbusters on it, but if you have green shoots that are this long, you know, you need to head them in to keep them compressed in the design. I wouldn't be like defoliating the tree this time of year. I wouldn't be necessarily doing a full wiring on the tree this time of year, but pruning should not be an issue, even on green growth. Okay.
All right. Ashley's question was, when repotting a Cascade style tree, is there a proper way to repot it so that you can see the best movement out of your tree, or is there anything you might recommend? Also, is there any position you would say would be a non-proper way to pot or repot a Cascade style tree?
Well, so that's a good question. Yes and no. So you're kind of a slave to whichever way the branches are growing, but there are several different ways to appreciate Cascade. So I don't know, I was talking about this earlier, about the different kind of aesthetics of Cascade design, and I'll talk about these again. So this was the original kind of Cascade design that they did in Japan, and you'll see that everything was very much in a line. So the cascading portion went in front of the pot and draped right in front, basically arced over the side, but crawled back in front of the pot and made a line straight up and down with the top tree and the bottom tree. So that's the old aesthetic, and that was looking at the front of the tree. So the movement would essentially be coming to the side and towards you, okay? The other way, the more contemporary way, is kind of in profile, going out over to the side of the pot so that we're seeing the most of the undulations and the most of the trunk and the pads. It also opens up a good degree of the pot, and we see a little bit more of this arc over the edge. So this is a more contemporary design, and more people are doing this sort of cascade. I think the only thing that you would not want to do is, and this will be kind of hard to explain, but on this tree, there would be two sides that I would not use for the front, and that would be this side I would not use for the front, and that side I would probably not use for the front. And the reason being for that isn't that that you couldn't necessarily use them for the front, it's just that you are now losing movement in the design. So think of it like this. If I have a curve like this, and I point that curve towards you, now where it's curving towards you, now you don't see any movement. All you see is a straight line. So you never want to be pointing the curves directly at or away from the viewer. They refer to that as pigeon breast or reverse pigeon breast, and that will basically mean you don't see the movement of that branch. So usually you want to look at the design, look at the branches, and try and find the side that gives you the best look of all that movement without having those pigeon breasts or reverse pigeon breasts. Okay? If that makes sense.
Alex would like to know, do you have an IG account or fan page on Facebook to see your work?
Yes, thank you. So my Instagram is Mike Lane's Show-In Studio on Instagram, and I do try to upload trees at least a couple times a week, what I'm working with, what I'm doing, and then I'm under Facebook at Mike Lane Bonsai, or sorry, just Mike Lane, and you can also follow along there if you like to. So I do try to keep everything shared to all the pages, so in case you don't have Instagram, you can follow me on Facebook. But like I said, I try to keep it updated at least a couple times a week. Any other questions out there? They're doing good, huh? Sneak back behind you.
Go for it. Ashley says, makes sense. Thank you. Hey, don't forget your cuttings over there by the work area.
Thanks, Ashley.
And try out that fishing spot.
That's good. She's the one that we didn't answer her questions last time.
I didn't see that one,
Me neither.
but yes, and we also post all the Facebook live videos on YouTube as well.
Beautiful day here in Florida. We're enjoying a nice breezy hot day, so hope you guys are enjoying your spring wherever you're at. Yeah.
So what else you got going on Thursday? Right?
Yeah, so Thursday I'm going to be teaching some online classes. Again, if any of you guys are interested, we'll be doing the same kind of format. It's $25 for a half hour of my time. And we'll meet on either Zoom or Skype. And it's really, really useful for if you have some questions based off what you should do on your collection this time of year. If you have a specific issue with a tree that you're not sure how to fix it, you know, you could always get a half hour with me. We could go over some of your issues or some of your plans and at least get you on the right track to work on your trees this season. So if we're interested in that, we're doing that Thursday. We have 3 spots available, and then we'll be doing another one the following Saturday. So if you can't get into this Thursday, just give us a call at the nursery and we'll get you set up for the following Saturday.
Are you using aluminum or copper wire?
Aluminum wire. So here in the tropics, we use aluminum mostly just due to cost. We do remove and put the wire on several times a year, and so it works to our favor to just use aluminum. It's a little bit cheaper, and it allows us to kind of take it off and replace it a lot more often without breaking the bank. Trees up north that grow a little slower, or conifers where the wire is going to be on for a longer period of time, those are good trees to use copper on. Copper is also a lot more difficult to use, so aluminum kind of, it's easier if you're not good, if you have arthritis or it's hard for you to work with your hands. You'll really find that aluminum is a lot easier than the copper wire.
Janice says she really got a lot out of the wiring class you taught. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you. I'm glad. Yeah, wiring. So there's people who love wiring and people who hate wiring. And I always like to teach in my classes that you don't have to learn how to wire to do bonsai, but that there is no easy way to do bonsai. So whether you choose to wire or whether you choose to do very strict, deliberate, intensive pruning, one of those paths either is going to be very, very difficult. So there's not going to be in one way that's easier than the other. So you either learn to love wiring or learn to love pruning.
Adrian says he was told that in Japan they use copper wire on all shohin. Is that true?
Yes.
And why?
Copper wire is just deemed it's a better wire overall. So if I had the money, or if we had the money here in the tropics and money was no issue, we would wire everything with copper wire. It holds better with less wire. It's way prettier, so it tarnishes, and when it tarnishes you can't visibly see it on the tree, so it kind of disappears in the tree, thus enabling you to even possibly display trees with wire on them without people knowing. Like I said, you can use a lot less of it to achieve the same hold. There are some cons though. As I said, it's a lot harder to work with. If you only really get one shot at locking in your movement with copper, because each time you bend it, it gets harder and harder to bend it again. Work hardens. So it can be very difficult to fix mistakes if you mess up on wire. There's no backing off copper wire and redoing it. So it is a lot more difficult to use, but it is in every way better if you can afford it. You know, so being in Japan, they don't cut corners on their bonsai typically, so it doesn't surprise me that they would use copper wire on all their trees.
Ashley has a question, or she says that's a neat little thing you got on your tree so you can slant your tree. Where might I find one of those?
So one of our students, Bruce Riggins, actually makes these, and this was one that was made by him. So you could always get in contact with him. I'm sure he's a really nice guy, really good student. He'd be more than happy to work with you and come up with a design that works for you.
Brian says yay for pruning.
Now, everybody says that, but I think if we're talking about high-level bonsai, so not just pruning for maintenance, but if we're talking about high-level, like kokufu Japanese bonsai, there are people who don't wire and still get their trees to that level, but it's not easy work. They're not, like the fact that everybody says yay for pruning, it is funny, but on that same thing, is to do it the right way, the real way, it wouldn't be any easier than wiring. It truly wouldn't, because what they do in Japan to clip and grow or to prune trees is very deliberate assessment of vigor of every bud. So everything that's got a leaf on it, they'll weigh the balance and the strength of that bud and prune it accordingly. So it's not just a hedge prune where you just start at one side of the tree and finish on the other side. It's carefully looking through each and every part of the tree that's growing and making a prune based on the strength of that bud. So that's how they're really doing it in Japan, and that is not, I'd rather almost wire sometimes. So, so there are pros and cons to each approach, and I like to use both. Any other questions from the peanut gallery? No, they're very good today.
They are.
Well behaved out there.
Jory has a question.
Sure.
She wants to know, how do you know when to change the wire?
So the wire will start to, we're always looking for when the branch is starting to swell or when the wire is starting to get tight. You'll see that the branch almost swells into the wire. I'm just getting some water, sorry. But you'll see that the branch almost swells into the wire, and you'll see there's an area just where it looks like it's starting to look like a sausage almost, where it's just starting to pop out and the wire's just squeezing it a little bit, and you'll see that it's getting fatter, almost like it's swelling around the wire. That's right before it cuts in, and that's a good time to remove at least that one link. So when I remove wire, if I was going to remove wire from here, if I had cut in here, I wouldn't remove all of this wire just to get that one piece off. I would remove the one offending piece and leave the rest of the wire on until that starts to approach cutting in. But you do have to check your trees routinely. Once a week, you got to go look at your trees. You know, you're going to forget sometimes. Even me, even Eric, we sometimes miss it. But the more you look at your trees, the more you check on them, the less likely you will to leave wire on long periods of time.
Brian says Mike's wiring class did teach me a lot. He's a good teacher.
Well, thank you, Brian. Is that Brian?
Harrington?
Okay. Yeah.
He was the guy who said yay for pruning.
Yay for pruning. I'm off for pruning too. Believe it or not. We're just slowly working our way through this. How How are we doing on time? We've done an hour.
You've definitely done an hour and 20, I believe.
Okay.
You got a solid 60 viewers.
Yeah, waiting for a rainy season to start. I'm really excited for us to get our first real rain, which those of us who, I'm sure we've noticed that our plants haven't quite started to grow as fast as they do in summer, and that's just because we haven't had any rainfall. So rainfall brings with it a lot of really good things. High nitrogen water, low pH water that allows plants more availability of nutrients. And so once we get that first rain, you'll really see your trees that are kind of half growing now will really start growing gangbusters then.
Justin would like to know, are you watering every day now?
I am. So, but not every tree. So watering, keep in mind that what makes me choose how I water is what soil it's in, how full it is on the top, the time of year, how much sun it's getting, and how windy it is, are just a few variables. So for instance, if I have a plant that has no foliage on it and it's in a big pot of nursery soil, and I just watered it yesterday all the way through, then I would be watering that probably every other day still, maybe every third day still. But my plants that are in full bonsai soil, that are leafed out, that are in full sun, my shohin especially, I'm watering at least every day fully. So some other plants, like I said, that maybe don't have as many leaves, that are in big organic soil pots, I'm not watering them every day. So just be careful to assess each tree and what it needs and water accordingly.
Okay. They'd like me to zoom in to see the wiring. So let's see if that's good. Try to...
Oh no!
Gail says cut paste gray or orange.
Me personally, I really like the putty, but they all kind of have their pros and cons a little bit. The putty is a little bit harder to cover large surface areas with, and it's a little more expensive to do that with. So the putty I really like for smaller wounds, no bigger than a quarter. The orange is great for very, very large wounds. So if I had to paste like a trunk chop or something like that. But for the most part, I really, really like the putty. Now, it is important to know that what is happening with cut paste and what we're actually looking for with cut paste, because all we're trying to do is find something that will keep moisture in the tree. So you can use, in Japan, they've used anything from grafting tape to plumber's putty to electrical tape, anything that will sit over the wound and keep both moisture from the outside getting in and moisture from the inside getting out. Okay, so that's what kind of really promotes that healing, is keeping moisture in the wound from escaping.
Andrea says talk about your online class Thursday.
I did.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt to
All right, so yeah,
remind people.
Just touching base again. We are going to be teaching online classes again this week. They're $25 for a half hour, and you'll get to talk to me about some of your trees, any issues you're having, or if you need any advice with your trees. We'll be doing that on both Zoom and Skype, depending on which platform you're more comfortable with. I'm actually going to redo this. So if you guys are interested in that, just feel free to call the nursery and set it up with Andrea. We do have 3 spots available for Thursday, and if for some reason those sell out, we will be doing a follow-up class the following Saturday.
And those sessions can be recorded and sent to you.
Yes. So if you or if you want to watch it later on, you could always do that too.
It's yours
by
to keep.
recording it.
Brian wants to know what's the black stuff on the thicker branches.
Oh,
Is-
it's probably just like a not dirt, but it's probably just like mildew from water sitting on the trunk. It probably just needs to be brushed.
So is the online class a help session, or are you covering something specific?
Well, it can be catered to you however you want it. We're offering, if you wanted to see a specific technique done, you could have that done. And so, like, if you wanted me to do a video on grafting and show you how to do that, we could do that. Or you could walk me through your collection if you're having questions on what you should be working on this time of year, what you should be doing. Now, areas where it's not the best format, we've realized, is it's not the best format for styling very, very dense trees and telling you what very small branches to cut off. But for rough design ideas, it seemed very, very helpful. But it did seem to benefit more people that were just questioning like what stuff they should be working on, maybe if they had some issues going on with their plants. Just kind of talking about their collection and going over advice and aesthetics tips, things like that. Okay. So for those of you wondering why I just took that one wire off and replaced it, was sometimes we do make mistakes, and that wire wasn't going to be strong enough or long enough for me to do what I wanted with it. So I kept coming up short, so I decided just to restart it. Sorry.
Oh, you're fine. Mm-hmm. Brian says, I have a couple trees that have that. Other than a brush, what do you use? My trees have that, have pine-like bark.
So if you have a pine-like bark, you do not want to obviously use a rough brush that scrapes off the bark. So one thing that you can use is either peroxide or rubbing alcohol that can kind of kill that mildew or that like moldy kind of buildup. So peroxide tends to work better because it's kills with oxygen, so it oxidizes, and that's its method of killing. So I do like peroxide-based products. One that they have is called Zero Tall. That's like a specific horticultural peroxide-based product. But even just using a toothbrush and peroxide and just very gently getting it on there will help clear up a lot of that stuff. Just don't let it drip down into the pot.
Are there corky bark jades at Wigert's?
I'm not sure. You'd have to contact him and see. I know he has plenty of dwarf jades. I don't know if he has any that are the actual cork bark cultivar.
We had some for a while.
Yeah, I just
Could have sold out of them.
Right, and so he might. So I would definitely encourage you guys to either call and ask, or maybe we can have Andrea check afterwards and message you guys, see who was interested in that.
So it sounded like Brian's trees that have the black stuff on the bark, they are cedar elms.
Oh yeah. So you do want to be careful not to scrape that bark off, and that's exactly how I would do that, is just with peroxide. You know, very gently with peroxide, and slowly take that away. Another thing that you might consider, now this is risky and we're already past the window to do it. In Japan, a lot of guys treat their deciduous trees with lime sulfur. So they mix it 1 to 30 parts water. So 1 part lime sulfur to 30 parts water. And when the tree is completely defoliated, they will actually dunk the whole tree or spray the tree in that lime sulfur mixture, and that kills all the fungus, any of those kind of the black sooty molds or anything like that. But it's not without its risk if you do it wrong or if you're doing it at the wrong time of year. So they usually do that in the end of winter, or once the trees are fully deciduous, and you definitely don't want to do it if it's leafed out. So keep that in mind for next year, and maybe do a little further reading just to make sure you're confident with it, and that might even be your best bet going forward.
Adrian would like to know, what's your opinion on expensive shears for bonsai? Because I see you cutting everything and anything with those red shears. Does it make a big difference using the expensive tools?
So some of the tools, yes. And I will say that everything has a place. Like if I wanted to cut beautiful cuttings and I wanted to absolutely make flawless cuts that I'm not going to have any issues with, then yeah, the sharpest tool is best. So there will be times when doing delicate work, making cuttings, something like that, where the sharpest shear you can get is going to benefit you. Making nice clean cuts on super tight, dense internode branches, or even what they do in Japan is cutting buds and selecting buds. You really need sharp scissors for that. So to answer your question, in the grand scheme of things, no. Like where most of us are at in bonsai, you don't need anything more than kind of strong gardening shears that you can resharpen. Now I do keep a pair of scissors that is kept sharp, that I can use, that I don't ever cut wire with, I don't ever do anything like that with. Has it really changed my bonsai career? And have I noticed that I'm better off with the sharper ones? Not really. The only tool I'll say that you cannot flake out with money-wise, that you cannot get the cheap one, is the concave cutter. So I started as a beginner just like everybody else. I owned a Chinese set of beginner tools, and my concave cutter, didn't last a tremendous amount of time, and it also didn't cut very clean. So there were always like little edges that it didn't cut through, and I always had to go back with my shears and cut it off. So a good concave cutter, it's one of the tools you can't get a replacement at Home Depot. You know, I can go get a wire cutter at Home Depot and get a plier at Home Depot, but I can't really get these cutting tools anywhere else but in the bonsai world. So I'd say spend at least $50 on your concave. Definitely get Japanese, and that should be definitely the tool you spend your money on before you buy any other tools. Okay, everything else can come later.
Brian says, thanks. He was using a toothbrush. It was very tedious.
Yeah. So try, that can be very, very tedious, and especially if you're trying not to knock the bark off, I can understand that. So hopefully that helps you. I can't promise it'll make it less of a pain in the butt, but hopefully it'll at least speed things up a little bit for you.
All right, and Ashley says that we have sold out of the cork bark shades, and we have to make more cuttings.
That's all right.
That's what it's all about.
That's what it's all about. Okay, we're approaching, everybody. A few more pieces of wire. Oh, I see another one I didn't wire. Eric is taking his Cascade. We no longer have that example, so I hope you guys got all your questions out about the Boom Gen Cascade. Now, again, I'm working with material right now that's not exactly set up for our traditional kind of cookie cutter Cascade bonsai, so we are using a lot of things that if I was growing this tree from cutting or seed, I wouldn't have grown this way. I wouldn't have positioned some of these structural branches in the way that they are. But as I was saying earlier, the tree has far too much age to do a cut back to a trunk line. And although we could do that and still make a successful tree, we'd be losing a lot of age. That would take us just as much time to grow back. So at this point, it's my opinion that you work with the tree the best you can, make the best tree you can with what it has available to you, and that's what you can do with it, you know, and take the lessons you learn from it and apply that to trees of your own going forward, and don't make those same mistakes.
Okay, Rick has a question. He goes, you know, good bonsai tools are nice to have. They do get dull and need to be sharpened. This is when I ruin them. Can you recommend a course on proper tool care and sharpening?
Well, so I'm not, honestly, I can't tell you like the best place to go to find like traditional Japanese sharpening, but I can tell you that Bruce Riggins, the same student who makes both our wire caddies and these stands, does do tool sharpening and tool repair. So you can always get in touch with him through us out here. He does do that, and I've used his services before and I've been very happy with his services. Tools that I was ready to just throw in the trash are now back in the tool belt being used. So he's done a great job on my tools in the past. So I can definitely recommend him. But I know that won't help you learn how to sharpen your tools yourself. I unfortunately don't know a good resource to learn that from.
Jane says, I have a lot of lichen on several of my trees. Should I remove it? If so, how?
Well, so I'm kind of the opinion not to let lichen grow. Sometimes it does look good, but from what I've seen on my trees and trees out here in the nursery, students' trees, is that after a certain amount of time, that lichen does spread all over the tree. It becomes very, very difficult to remove, very, very difficult, and you'll spend hours trying to get down to the final layer of the lichen to remove it. And the last part that's really bad is anywhere where it grows too thick, it will inhibit the branch's ability to bud back and give you a second branch. So if you have lichen that's, you know, a centimeter thick around your branches, then when you cut them back, there's not going to be anywhere for the new buds to kind of bud out and make new branches. So the lichen is something that I try to get rid of it as soon as I see it. When it's little spots, I try to take care of it then. Toothbrushing it is my primary way, with maybe some peroxide as well, but even that's iffy, and definitely a lot more difficult if I let it go past that point and it gets really, really bad. Another thing you can use that a lot of people really seem to like are spot guns. They're like little mini pressure washers, and those seem to be really good for cleaning off smooth bark trunks, you know, crepe myrtles, junipers, things like that, where it's not going to be an issue that you're hitting it with that high stream of water. That was a pretty good question. Any other good questions like that?
You're on top of them all, Mike.
Jeez. I'm kicking total butt.
You are.
What's new, right? So I'm trying to set up a guy wire here and bring one of these branches down. The best way to do a guy wire, in my opinion, is wire to wire, if I can do it. That way my guy wire is not running any risk of damaging a branch. So I usually run a long wire through here. There we go. Okay, now note that when I make a guy wire, I have two pieces of wire here. I don't just have the one piece of wire. I'm not just pulling it down and then attaching the one piece of wire. I'm actually using both pieces to kind of form my guy wire. Let's see. Maybe this one. Okay. So now my wire, it's guy wired to the other wire. All right. So now here's how I use guy wires. I don't use it by grabbing here and pulling the branch. That is not the safe way to use a guy wire. The safe way is to grab the branch with my hand and move with my hand, and then down here, roll up the slack on the guy wire. Okay, so again, I pinch down with my hand, controlling with my hand, and then I roll up the slack with my other hand. So you're never pulling with this. That's not enough control, and you can break a really delicate branch that way if you're pulling too hard on the guy wire without paying attention. Okay? So now the last thing I do, just to kind of make it look a little better, is I just give it some twists. Make it a little less obnoxious.
Mark would like to know how the construction of the new building is doing.
Well, we've got our concrete pad down, and it's going really, really well. It's absolutely going to be a gigantic facility. I think that we're going to be, all of us who come here for classes and to do our bonsai are going to be absolutely spoiled. So I'm personally very, very excited about it. We've gotten the first steps of construction done, and so it's only a matter of time. We'll be back in our new home, new facility, and teaching better and faster and more than ever before.
Justin would like to know, would you be able to save the branch if it snapped?
Yes, absolutely. So when I first got into bonsai, cracking branches used to be a death sentence. You know, I'd crack a branch and it was guaranteed that branch would die. Because at that time, I didn't really believe in cut paste. I thought cut paste was something that, you know, sure, it was good for a tree, but I didn't think it was essential for bonsai design. What I've discovered in years since that is that it is essential for design. If I crack any of these branches on this tree, I can paste it, and 9 out of 10 times that branch will be fine. As long as I haven't cracked it, you know, all the way through the branch, that branch will be fine 9 out of 10 times. I've actually gotten so confident with this technique that when I'm at home wiring cuttings and I'm trying to create very, very interesting bends in trees, I will actually wire the branch on things like hibiscus, and I will bend it to the point that it starts to break. So I won't stop until it starts to break, and at that point I'll paste the broken area, the slight little break, and then I allow the tree to recover, and then I do the same thing, and that allows me to get very, very tight bends that otherwise would be impossible. So that's a big part of my philosophy now, is the break tells me when to stop bending a lot of times. You don't, I mean, ideally if you can stop right before it breaks, that's better, but I'm not worried about cracking a branch now to get the movement I desire. I'd rather get the movement I want and fix the cracked branch than have to kind of work with movement that I'm not truly happy with. So there's some areas that I would like to see grow a little bit longer. So the only area I would probably work on this tree is to grow this section out further. So if everybody can see that, I'd like to have a section of this branch that's lower end up coming out further than this branch. Okay? Now I could always just cut this one in back but in order to get it behind this branch, I'd have to cut it back to here, then this one back to here, and I think it's just easier and better to just grow this branch out to be longer, okay? So this is roughly the design I'm going to go for. Again, it's not your cliche run-of-the-mill Cascade. There is a lot that's going on in there that maybe would be removed on a tree that I was growing from the ground up. But since we have it on here and it does exhibit a great amount of age, we're going to leave it and work with it to the best of our abilities. Okay? So that's kind of my theory on bonsai as a whole. If I'm growing it from the ground up and I have control over the tree, then I will do my best to eliminate as many of the flaws or follow the rules as much as I can to build a quality tree, because I'm there to do that. But if I'm dealing with an old tree, a mature specimen that has a lot of age to it, I don't want to necessarily just cut it back to my cookie cutter idea of bonsai and then regrow it to my idea. That's not very respectful to the age. So those are my two. That's my approach to bonsai, my philosophy on it, and it's served me well so far as coming up with some cool and unorthodox bonsai styles. So before we close out the program, I just want to real quick touch base with all you guys out there. Make sure there's no closing comments, any closing questions out there.
We do.
All right.
Mark would like to know, do you use the green paste when you crack a branch?
So the green paste, you could, yes, absolutely. So the green paste, what that's technically for, that's a grafting paste. So that works best on wounds that you're never going to have to recut again. So cracking branches, it's probably the best paste to use because it's actually made to keep water out. It's a better sealant, and it does stay on there the life of the plant until it kind of heals over that. So that's probably best for cracked branches. It's not good for healing wounds. So keep this in mind. That green paste, do not put on big wounds, because again, as I just said, that doesn't come off easily. It's made to recut there if you have to, or to stay on forever. It's not made to flake off on its own. It's not made to heal big wounds. It's made to keep water out of wounds that you're going to recut later, grafts, or healing broken branches. So that's what I know about the green stuff. Be very careful using it on big wounds. Okay.
All right, we have some other suggestions for topics. Growing Japanese maples and other deciduous trees in tropical climates.
Ooh.
We have some thanks mics. We have some junipers next.
No.
And Craig will see us as soon as his wife lets him out of lockdown.
Awesome. Well, you guys, we're going to keep doing these things as long as we can. We're going to try to come up with fun concepts, fun ideas, and we are reaching out to you guys for ideas too. So if something pops in your mind that you like or you want to learn more about, we will add it to our poll, and we'll try and see what gets the most interest and just keep following up with these programs. I do sincerely thank every single one of you guys for tuning in every week and kind of seeing how these videos are going. This is a new kind of platform for us and a new direction we're taking Eric's Nursery, and so it's just been really cool to see the support and to see you guys all kind of showing up for this stuff and really taking it to the next level. So thanks again for everybody for showing up and listening, and we'll see you guys next week. And
the nursery is open.
Nursery is open.
Regular hours, correct?
So the nursery is open, regular hours. We are, this is a safe place. Everybody's practicing social distancing. We are following all guidelines that the governor expressed. And so I do recommend that you guys get out of the house. Honestly, I've been going stir crazy myself, looking for somewhere to go to just walk around. And this is the perfect place. There's gardens, areas where you could just be by yourself for a little bit. So feel free to come on out here and say hello and at least check out some of the trees. So we are open 7 days a week, and we do welcome all of you.
Awesome. And we have a request. Can we put the tree on the stand to see it level?
Yeah. Wait,
all
see it level?
Yeah, I think they just want to see it.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Right? Yeah.
So that's the tree level.
All right.
So again, just to illustrate that point, that's again why playing with the angles is so important, is by raising it up, that gives us a lot more tree.
Oh yeah. All right.
So, and I guess one more thing, since she brought it up, I didn't touch on that, is yes, this will be repotted at this angle. So we'll put the pot here, and that will be the new angle that it's potted at. Okay. So, again, thank you guys all for tuning in. These have been a lot of fun, and keep the questions coming, keep the interest coming, and we'll touch base with you guys next week.
Go ahead and like, subscribe, share a video, comment on it, and we'll see you guys later.
All right, guys, bye.